الإبليسي الأعرابي في نسيج دين الله الإسلام والمسيحية المقدسة، حيث تتشابك خيوط العلم والإيمان، يختبئ أشخاص يتنكرون في زي رعاة الأمانة. إنهم ذئاب في ثياب حملان، ألسنتهم تقطر بكلمات معسولة تخفي أجندة سامة. إنهم شيوخ وقساوسة مزيفون، تجار الخداع، الذين يستغلون حرمة الدين لتحقيق مكاسب شخصية وزرع بذور الفتنة بين الجماهير المطمئنة قلوبهم والمستهلكة بالرغبات الدنيوية الإبليسية، وعقولهم خالية من التنوير الروحي الحقيقي. إن هؤلاء الذين نصبوا أنفسهم أوصياء على الدين هم سادة التلاعب. إنهم يفترسون نقاط ضعف المتدينين، مستغلين توقهم للإرشاد الروحي. وهذه هي مدرسة التلمود والتناخ البني إسرائيلي كالمشناة والجمارة، والتي أصبحت أخباراً وأناشيد في المسيحية وسيرة وأحاديث في الإسلام، بخطب وإعلانات مصاغة بعناية، يشوهون تعاليم دين الله الحقيقية. تفسيراتهم مشوهة لخدمة دوافعهم الأنانية، مما يؤدي باتباعهم إلى الضلال عن طريق الحق. كيف وهم تلاميذ بولس الطرسوسي وكعب الأحبار؟ إنهم سلالة خطيرة. هؤلاء الشيوخ والقساوسة المزيفون هم كهنة وسدنة إبليس، لأنهم يقوضون أسس الإيمان والوحدة داخل مجتمعاتنا. غشهم سم قاتل، إنه يتسرب إلى قلوب غير الحذرين ويغيب بصيرتهم ويحرضهم على إخوانهم من المسلمين والمسيحيين. إن هؤلاء الشيوخ والقساوسة المزيفين هم مهندسو الفرقة ومحرضو الكراهية وأعداء الحقيقة. إرثهم هو الصراع والفتنة على النقيض تماما من رسالة السلام والوحدة التي هي جوهر دين الله. يجب أن نكون يقظين ضد هؤلاء الذئاب في ثياب حملان. إنهم أحفاد المفسدون في الأرض الضالون وسفكة الدماء المغضوب عليهم من الخنازير والقردة. قد تبدو كلماتهم حلوة، لكن نواياهم مرة. من واجبنا فضح نفاقهم وحماية حرمة ديننا. دعونا لا نتأثر بخطابهم الفارغ أو نغرى بوعودهم الكاذبة، فقد خدعونا لقرون طويلة. حولوا قبلة الحق من مكانها الإلهي الثابت في الأرض المباركة فلسطين، من بكة القدس إلى مكة الصحراء والفاتيكان وما شابهها من مكاك سلبية عدة أعدت للغافلين. من خلال السعي وراء المعرفة والفهم الحقيقيين، فإننا نعزز أنفسنا ضد الخداع. فلا تستسلموا لمن يحصد الأموال في كروشهم العفنة. 350 مليار دولار مدخول مكة الصحراء كل عام من عمرة وحج. أين تذهب هذه الأموال؟ ومثلها كثير في مكات السلب المسيحية المنتشرة حول العالم. إن الروح الحقيقية للإسلام والمسيحية من قبل هي روح الرحمة والحكمة والوحدة. دعونا نعتنق هذه القيم ونسعى جاهدين للعيش بها كل يوم، من خلال نصرة المظلومين ومد يد العون لكل محتاج فقير وطالب علم إلهي. إن القيام بذلك واجب فرضه الله علينا بأن نتشبه بالكنعانيين. كونوا عونا، أي اسجدوا لسكان الأرض بخدمتهم كما أمر الله. هكذا فقط نحافظ على جوهر ديننا ونحمي مجتمعنا من أولئك الذين يسعون إلى تفريقنا وتمزيق واجب خلقنا الإلهي. نعم، نعيش لفترة قصيرة لا تتخطى 125 عاما على الأكثر، ولكن سيسألنا الله فيما قضيناها. هل سمعنا وأطعنا أمر الله بالسجود لآدم وبني آدم، أم انخدعنا وانسحبنا وراء المنسلخ من دين الله إسرائيل وبني إسرائيل؟ احذروا الأعراب وشاربي بول الإبل منهم على الخصوص، هؤلاء في الدرك الأسفل من النار. انظروا مدى تخاذلهم هم وأمثالهم في المسيحية عن منكوبي أهل غزة وجنوب لبنان، من يظلمون في كل دقيقة أمام أعيننا. هل نتركهم ونبقى نتتبع المبولة المكية المقيتة؟
ليس بالضروري أن طالب العلم يحشر نفسه في كل صغيرة وكبيرة، فالسلامة لا يعدلها شيء أبدا، لا يعدل بالسلامة شيء. يوم القيامة في القبر إذا ما تتنزه عن بولك تعذب، لكن إذا جهلت أمور فلسطين لن تعذب. لو سألنا هؤلاء الذين اشتغلوا اليوم قضية فلسطين، لو قلنا كيف تتنزه من بولك، والله ما يعرفون. التنزه عن البول عند الفقهاء بأمرين: الأمر الأول تحرص أن لا يصل البول إلى جسمك وملابسك، والأمر الثاني إن وصل إلى الملابس تبادر إلى تطهيره. إذا ما تعرف هاتين الفقرتين فأنت تعذب في قبرك. لكن إذا ما عرفت مخططات الأعداء وفقه الواقع وما حصل للأمة لن يسألك الله تعالى على ذلك. فهذه نصيحة الإخوة، وشيخنا إذا كان عنده تتمة أو تعقيب جزاه الله خير.
You know, you shared this piece with us. This is enough. And wow, this one is intense.
It really is.
Yeah. It dives right into some pretty serious accusations.
Yes.
Questioning religious authority and, you know, calling out some pretty major transgressions. What struck you first when you read through it?
You know, what's fascinating is just the intensity of it. It's not like a calm academic analysis. It's much more like a passionate plea, a call to action almost, written with a sense of real urgency. And the language is so vivid when it paints this picture of, you know, deception and manipulation within religious institutions.
It really hits you right out of the gate with that image of wolves in sheep's clothing.
Right.
And referring to these false sheikhs and false priests. It pulls no punches.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
That metaphor is so powerful because it taps into this like primal fear of hidden danger.
Right.
You know, betrayal by those we trust.
Exactly.
And it really sets the stage for this whole narrative of, you know, spiritual leaders using their position not for guidance, but for personal gain.
It's almost like a thriller.
Yeah.
Right? You're just waiting to see, you know, who's going to be unmasked as the wolf.
Exactly.
And the source very clearly accuses these figures of preying on people's vulnerabilities. You know, twisting those religious teachings to serve their own agendas.
The source argues that these figures are basically like merchants of deception. You know, carefully crafting their speeches and pronouncements to manipulate their followers. And that raises a really important question. Why are people so susceptible to this kind of manipulation?
Yeah.
Especially in a religious context.
That is a great question. What do you think is at play there?
Well, I think there are a few factors at work. First, you know, religion often deals with these deeply personal questions, meaning purpose, morality, and people searching for answers. They can be vulnerable to those who offer certainty and easy solutions, especially if those solutions are framed within, you know, a familiar religious context.
It's like they're longing for that guidance and willing to put their faith in someone who appears to have all the answers.
Exactly. And then there's the power of charisma.
Oh, yeah.
You know, some religious leaders just have this magnetic personality that just draws people in.
Absolutely.
They might be skilled orators, you know, adept at using emotional appeals. Powerful imagery to sway their audiences.
It's like they create this aura of authority and people are drawn to that.
Right. And that can make it even harder for followers to question those teachings, even when doubts start to creep in.
So they're essentially blinding people with charisma and then taking advantage of that trust.
Unfortunately, sometimes, yeah.
And the source really emphasizes this idea that these wolves are actively creating conflict and disunity within faith communities.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point. You know, the source argues that these individuals motivated by selfishness and greed, they're disrupting the harmony of the flock. And you see this pattern throughout history. Religious differences exploited to consolidate power, justify violence, even wage wars.
It makes you wonder, how can we as individuals discern those genuine calls for unity from these manipulative tactics?
The source seems to suggest that critical thinking is key. It's about engaging with your faith on an intellectual and spiritual level. Not just blindly accepting everything you're told.
So don't check your brain at the door.
Exactly. Question, challenge. Think critically about what's being presented to you.
be an active participant.
Absolutely. And this ties into the source's frustration with how financial resources are being used within religious institutions.
Yeah. The source specifically mentions the vast sums of money generated by pilgrimages to Mecca.
Right.
And questions whether those funds are truly being used to serve the community or simply lining the pockets of those in power.
It's a bold claim, and it highlights a very real concern. And then the source contrasts this lavish spending with the lack of support for those suffering.
In places like Gaza and Lebanon.
Such a stark juxtaposition.
It is. It really drives home the point.
It's almost like a slap in the face, right?
Yeah.
This glaring inconsistency between preaching compassion and the reality of how resources are actually being allocated. And this reminds me of.
What's that?
The televangelist scandals of the 1980s.
Oh, yeah.
Like the case of Jim Bakker. He built this massive following preaching prosperity.
Right.
But it all came crashing down when he was convicted of fraud.
Ah, yes. Jim Bakker, a classic example of what the source is warning against.
Right.
He used his charisma and promises of wealth to manipulate followers into donating millions.
Wow.
Which he then used to fund a lavish lifestyle for himself.
Yeah.
A stark reminder that charisma can mask manipulative intent.
Absolutely. It's like the source is saying.
It's like the source is saying, don't be fooled by appearances. Just because someone has a platform, a following presents themselves as this pious figure, doesn't mean their motives are pure. And it makes you wonder, how many Baker-like figures are out there operating under the guise of religious authority? It's kind of a chilling thought.
It is. And that's why the source's call for vigilance is so important.
Right.
We need to be critical consumers of religious teachings, asking tough questions, and not being afraid to challenge those in positions of power.
The source doesn't just call out these problematic figures, though, right? It also offers a path forward.
Right.
Urging readers to embrace what it calls the true values of religion. What did you make of that section?
I found that section really compelling. It's like, okay, enough with the negativity.
Right.
Let's focus on what actually matters. It highlights compassion, wisdom, and unity as these core principles of faith.
Yeah. And it explicitly contrasts these values with the manipulative tactics of the false leaders that we've been discussing.
Exactly.
It's almost like a blueprint for authentic faith.
Right. It's not just about adhering to rituals or doctrines blindly. It's about actively living out those values in your daily life. It's about striving to be a better person to make a positive impact on the world around you.
The source even goes so far as to connect this idea of serving others to a divine obligation.
Right.
Arguing that supporting the oppressed and those seeking knowledge is a way to fulfill one's religious duty.
That's an interesting interpretation.
Right.
It elevates acts of service and social justice, framing them not just as moral imperatives, but as essential components of faith itself.
It's a powerful reframing of what it means to be a devout follower.
Yeah.
It's not about passive acceptance. It's about active engagement.
Yeah.
It's about taking your faith beyond the walls of your place of worship and into the world.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the source's rather pointed critique of how certain Islamic practices are being carried out. The language is pretty strong, even referencing those who drink camel urine being in the lowest depths of hell.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't mince words.
No, it does not.
It directly calls out what it sees as hypocrisy within the Muslim community.
And I think it's important to acknowledge here that the source is coming from a place of deep passion and concern for the well-being of the Muslim community.
Absolutely. It's a critique born out of love.
Yeah.
A desire to see the faith live up to its highest ideals.
It's a reminder that critique, even hard critique, can come from a place of deep care.
For sure.
And it's clear that the source is particularly troubled by what it sees as a misallocation of resources.
Yes.
It contrasts that lavish spending on pilgrimages to Mecca with the lack of support for those suffering in places like Gaza and Lebanon.
That juxtaposition is so striking.
It is.
It highlights this disconnect between religious practices and the core values of compassion and social justice.
It begs the question, what good is a pilgrimage if it doesn't translate into tangible action to help those in need?
Exactly. And this is where the source's call to action becomes so crucial. It's not enough to just talk about faith. You have to live it. You have to put those values into practice to make a real difference in the world.
And the source is very clear about what that action should look like. Supporting the oppressed, advocating for justice, and prioritizing the needs of the vulnerable. But it doesn't really offer specifics on how to do that, does it?
That's true. It lays out the what, but leaves the how up to the individual. And I think that's intentional. It's about empowering individuals to find their own ways to make a difference.
Okay.
To be agents of change within their own communities.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix the problems or relying solely on religious institutions to take action.
Right. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play. We can volunteer our time, donate to worthy causes, speak out against injustice, educate ourselves and others about the issues. There are countless ways to make a difference, both big and small.
This is where it gets really interesting because the source links all of this back to personal responsibility. It's not enough to simply identify the problems or critique those in power. We have a responsibility to hold those leaders accountable and to be actively involved in creating positive change.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive observers, we're active participants in shaping the religious landscape. We have a voice and we need to use it.
I think that's a really important message, especially in today's world, where it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the problems we face.
It is.
This source reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference, starting within our own communities. But how do we avoid falling into the trap of blindly following those who might not have our best interests at heart?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it circles back to the importance of discernment, which we talked about earlier. It's about being critical thinkers, about not being afraid to ask tough questions and challenge those in positions of authority. It's about cultivating that inner skeptic, that voice that says, wait, is this right? Does this align with my values? Am I being manipulated here?
Yeah. It's like we need to develop this BS detector for religious teachings.
Exactly. And that detector is fueled by knowledge, by critical thinking, and by a deep understanding of your own faith. It's about, being able to separate the wheat from the chaff.
But knowing how to do that can be tricky, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with these really charismatic figures or these complex theological arguments.
You're absolutely right. It's not always easy, but there are some red flags you can look out for.
Okay.
For example, be wary of leaders who demand unquestioning obedience, who discourage critical thinking, or who demonize those who disagree with them.
So anyone who tries to shut down questions or dissent.
Exactly. Big red flag.
What else?
Pay attention to how they use their platform. Are they genuinely focused on serving the community, or are they using their position for personal gain?
Right.
Are they transparent about their finances? Do their actions align with their words?
So it's about looking beyond the surface, right?
Yes.
At the substance of their teachings and the impact of their actions.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to seek out multiple perspectives. Read different interpretations of your faith. Talk to scholars and theologians. Engage in open and honest discussions with fellow believers.
So it's about being an active participant in your own spiritual journey, not just a passive recipient of someone else's dogma.
I love that. That perfectly captures what this source is advocating for. It's about owning your faith, understanding it deeply, and living it authentically.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another important question raised by this source. What is our responsibility when it comes to holding religious leaders accountable?
That's a big one. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of religious authority, especially if it's someone you've been taught to respect and obey.
I understand that feeling. But I think this source challenges us to move beyond that sense of powerlessness. It calls on us to be active participants in creating a more just and ethical religious landscape.
So it's not enough to just sit back and hope things will get better on their own.
Right. We need to be willing to speak up when we see injustice, to challenge those who abuse their power, and to demand better from our religious institutions.
But what if speaking out puts you at risk? What if it means going against your family or your community?
Those are valid concerns, and it's a decision that each individual has to make based on their own circumstances.
Right.
But I think this source is arguing that silence can be complicit. If we truly believe in the values of our faith, we have a moral obligation to speak truth to power, even when it's difficult.
It's about having the courage of your convictions, even when it means standing alone.
Exactly. And while it might feel daunting, remember that you're not alone. There are others who share your concerns, who are also working towards positive change. And collective action can be incredibly powerful.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've explored some dark corners of religious leadership, confronted uncomfortable truths, and wrestled with some big questions about faith, power, and responsibility.
It's been intense, challenging, and ultimately, I think, hopeful. Because while this source highlights the potential for corruption and manipulation within religious institutions, it also reminds us that we have the power to make things better. We have the power to choose who we follow, how we practice our faith, and how we hold those in power accountable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say this. Don't be afraid to question, to challenge, and to demand more from your faith and from those who claim to represent it. And as you continue to explore this topic, remember to seek out examples of authentic leadership, those individuals who embody the true spirit of compassion, integrity, and service. Let their examples inspire you, and let their actions guide you as you navigate the complexities of faith and belief.
That's great advice. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Yeah. We'll see you next time.